So the first issue we have here is explicitly mentioning in release which features, when features were introduced. Who put that in here? Anyone? Or maybe someone who's not here, I guess.
When I saw it yesterday, I assumed it was you.
Yeah, I didn't write. I'm not sure where that came from. I don't know. Maybe Sebastian put it in. Who's leaving?
a, a farewell gift.
Yeah, I guess we can start doing that. I don't think there's going to be any objections to that from now on. If we add any new big features, we can try to add doc notes when it came in.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea in general, personally. I know for when I was working on various things in Ceph, it was always like, when did this come in? Do I need to like exclude it from, like Nautilus or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, we can start doing that. I think. Yeah, I guess we probably want some notes then for things that we already have in. The agent, probably when that got added. Right now it's going to be in Quincy. They go Capricorn Pacific, so I guess a note will be about that. And then async SSH, I think when we change to that, maybe we should have a note for that. Those are like pretty big ones. Um, Other than that, I think we'll just try to do it with new things that come in. They happen. That should be good. Yeah, I don't think there's much more to discuss about that one. I don't think anyone's going to be against it. We can just move on to the next topic, which is using the NFS Manager module without an orchestration module enabled. I assume you put this in here, John? I think you were working on
Yes,
this.
I do. Yeah. Um, so to give a little bit more color, so originally this was partly started as a request for Ceph to wrap these APIs, but Blaine from the Rook team noted that while Rook does not want to require the manager module for Rook to be enabled, they do want to use these API calls. And today, um, it just fails. If you don't have a manager module enabled and you try to use, well, even the most basic thing like export ls, it fails. So I did a few minor patches around this area as I was reading the code, and I do have a work in progress branch where I've kind of changed it so it doesn't require the dependency to be there. But this only works for things that have already been set up at the moment. In other words, you already had Ceph ADM orchestration enabled, you created an NFS cluster, you created a couple exports, then you turn off the Ceph ADM manager. That's my work in progress branch at that point. What I want to raise here is the kind of the UX, the workflow around what would we want the world to look like in a place where we don't require the manager module. I think it's good to have, especially with Ceph ADM orchestration turned on. But for Rook or other people, in fact, I believe there is a mailing list post this morning. I didn't know if I should reply or not. There was there's like, how do we? So sorry, I'm missing something important. All these commands take a cluster ID. The cluster ID roughly maps to a Rados namespace inside of the .nfs pool, which is used to configure Ganesha and stuff. So I'm trying to figure out what should be the workflow to, say, establish these things when you're not running an orchestration. My two thoughts were somehow extending the existing NFS cluster create and cluster remove commands. That would work, but you'd essentially have a big if statement in each function, which would say something like if orchestration is there, it would set up the orchestration bits. if the orchestration's not there, and then the other option would be like a command line, an additional command line, like Boolean switch, something like, unmanaged, unorchestrated, something along those lines. I believe that's what Blaine proposed in the GoCeph issue. Um, I wasn't sure. I didn't really, in my own mind, really like the UX workflow for that. So the other one I was considering is a new set of commands, which would just be like register this cluster ID, unregister this cluster ID. These are for like things that you're managing on your own outside of orchestration. So you have basically a pair of commands when you're running with orchestration and a pair of commands when you're running without. I kind of like that approach because it's the jobs of the commands are more orthogonal. One is dedicated to setting up the cluster. One is just telling, hey, there's a cluster that should be here. And a bunch of the code underlying it can be shared. The issue with that is what to do when you're, say, flip-flopping between I've got maybe with orchestration and without. I don't know if we want to even bother supporting something like that. So now I'll stop rambling and let me know what your opinions on that are.
I mean, the first thought I always have, I guess, when I hear about this is, like the reason I think that the orchestrators or backend were required before is because you need that stuff to actually set up these clusters. Like you can't, there's no way to deploy daemons without either Rook or the FIDM to sort of do it for you. And so if we really want to get all of the commands to be working, without that, you almost need this manager module to then gain the ability to deploy daemons and things like that, which I don't think it was originally intended for. That'd be a pretty sort of big project to get all of that in here.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, the existing NFS module does in fact deploy. It uses the orchestration stuff to create new instances of services for NFS Ganesha and stuff like that. Again, we can double check with the Rook team, but I believe Rook's intention is to not require that. They'll be setting up Ganesha pods or whatever in Kubernetes, but they don't necessarily want anything beyond the export, add, remove, and delete. They don't. So the commands that start with like NFS cluster, I don't think they're interested in, except again maybe as a way to say, because right now all these commands that take a cluster ID, validate it. The first thing it does is this a real cluster ID? We could try to drop that validation, but I think that would be a much bigger code change. And it would probably not be a great UX experience if you don't have a way to validate the inputs up front.
Okay. So what you're saying is they don't actually want to do any daemon deployment, removal, anything with this. They just want like change the exports and things like that. List to export.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. If there's something like that, I guess you could get away without having a backend.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if that's all they want,
I can confirm with Blaine and others. I'm pretty confident that is where they're going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the important thing here is you have to like very clearly clarify what exactly they need from this.
I mean, yeah, the question I had is what's the use case for this? I mean, this Rook use case where they want like totally different, like separate APIs to list exports of clusters that are not deployed by Orchestrator, be it Rook or Ceph. What's the use case?
Yeah, I hope I'm representing them correctly. They want to use the same APIs for creating and deleting exports, just not managing the resources that back those. So again, using Kubernetes mechanisms, not Ceph orchestration mechanisms to run Ganesha instances.
Okay, I just saw Blaine joined. Maybe he can actually.
Yeah.
explain those.
Hey, I'm glad I popped in at a good time. We just
Yeah, so
finished with Rook.
we were talking about
Great.
the NFS work. The other guy, I was linking again. I don't know if the messages keep. And so John was sort of trying to explain like what we want to do moving forward there, and I guess what we were trying to clarify was exactly what your like use case is and the requirements and things. I don't know if you want to try to go into that. Like, what exactly do you guys want the manager NFS to be able to do for you without having an orchestration backend?
Essentially, we just want to be able to manage the exports. Um, you know, NFS create, cluster, remove with no orchestration. I mean, I mean, I don't know what it would really do for us. I mean, I'm sure it could create the like pools and things that are needed, but that's pretty low level stuff. Um, Mostly, it's like the exports are all kind of created um, in a now in a pool that has a defined name, and the namespace in the pool where that's located is deterministic based on the cluster name, and those are all things we have to pass to the NFS, like export, create, uh, edit, delete commands. So not going through the
Yeah.
orchestrator for the exports is going to be necessary for, I mean, I guess not necessary, but it's going to cause less like connection headaches for creating a CSI driver that can create NFS exports based on NFS clusters.
Hmm.
So my
I
question is
gotcha.
how the NFS cluster is going to be deployed for this use case? Is it wouldn't be through the orchestrator module. Rook could separately deploy it, have its own way of storing the radar's export objects in a different pool rather than the one that we use right now, which is hard coded.
Right. Yeah. Rook. Yeah. I did a lot of work 2 months ago, 3 months ago, um, to make sure that the integration with Rook using the new pools is all good. So Rook uses the default pool, the .nfs pool. It uses the namespace that is the same as the name of the NFS cluster. So
Right.
that's not really a concern from the Rook side. Like things are connected appropriately. Like any options that users set around it are just ignored.
Yeah, so for what I understand, Rook is going to deploy the necessary paces, Ganesha pods, etc., and you want to reuse the same components for, say, a CSI driver to create exports that were already there in the NFS commands. So when I was looking at the code, I guess you might have heard me say this. I'll just repeat it. I think because you might have joined a little late. Um, Breaking the dependency of like listing exports, creating exports from an orchestration module doesn't seem too hard. The trick is knowing what cluster IDs are valid. Um, so I was proposing we could either add new commands like NFS cluster register unregister to say these are cluster IDs I recognize but are not going to be managed by orchestration, or we do something where we use the existing cluster add and remove commands, but add like a dash dash no orchestration option or something.
Um, yeah, I guess my thought for how that would work, which I mean I'm open to other like considerations as well. I think the register creates a um, more work for Rook to do and like more backporting work of like, well, what versions of Ceph does this work with and what versions of Ceph does this not work with?
Okay.
Um, mm, Although I suppose that's a concern for what we're doing anyway,
Right.
in some respect. Uh, let me get my bearings again. The the way that I figured would be easiest to determine like does this NFS cluster exist or not would be to find out whether there is a namespace in the .nfs pool that contains that cluster ID.
Right.
And if it exists, you assume the NFS cluster exists.
So are you suggesting that something outside of the NFS manager module commands would just create that namespace according to the current standard?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, as Rook handles it, when it creates a Ceph NFS cluster, um, it makes sure that .nfs namespace is created.
Okay.
It makes sure that there is a config object present in the namespace.
Okay. So that is exactly what I was thinking the register command would do. That way we'd have kind of code all in one place. But if Rook's already doing that, it could be something we would add in the future, but we wouldn't necessarily need it. I guess the only concern I would have is like if things changed in the future. Now Rook is kind of doing it, Manager Module is doing it. I'm okay with that. It does make it less work for these orchestration changes because it's basically my prototype cleaned up a little bit. So yeah, we could live without doing it for now. I just I don't know what do you others think about just skipping that if Rook's already doing it? Basically forcing is probably the wrong word, but requiring if anyone's going to set up clusters outside of orchestration, they have to manually create the required Rados objects and namespaces.
And how do you distinguish between this case and between another case than when somebody just has forgotten to configure their orchestration? Right.
Yeah, I would say in the documentation, if it says, hey, you're not using orchestration, you need to do this. Again, it's not doing it in code, so there's potential for mistakes and stuff, but it's a possibility in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm also like from like the Rook side of things, it's also totally fine if we have to supply a flag that says like skip orchestrator or something like that. I don't think that's necessary, but that is an option that does mean that that like most users who are just going by the Ceph documentation will encounter an error if there is no orchestrator hooked up.
Right.
It's mostly I guess I'm focused on like automating it from the CSI driver.
Right.
And other things that are like programmatic.
Yeah, I mean the question I had is going back. So the Rook sets up this cluster, by just you let the user apply a NFS cluster manifest or something like that. Is that how it starts out?
Yeah. So the Ceph NFS custom resource will create an NFS server cluster, and it configures it to use the Ceph backend, but it stops at the point of it does not do any export management.
Okay, and you made sure that the way the cluster is set up is exactly the same as what manage NFS module does with respect to not just creating pool and setting a namespace for the particular cluster, also setting up the recovery database for the particular cluster and other, other information that's required to set up HA. So all that work that manage NFS module does for the NFS cluster is done by this Rook CRD.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time 2 or 3 months ago verifying all of that and verifying the like it. I think it's released now, but it was like pre-release of like the 16.2.7 of Ceph to make sure that Rook would create pools appropriately, and I actually tested like that we could, have an update path for users from the prior way of configuration to the new pools and everything. So everything there should be working as needed. I spent a lot of time doing that. I mean, I think a lot of people spend a lot of time doing that, to be fair, but I spent a lot of time verifying that it works.
So to sort of like clarify things, it seems like really what we just need to do is drop the orchestrator backend requirement from the export commands and handle this verifying the cluster ID is real thing. And then we should be okay.
And in this scenario, I'm just asking out of ignorance because I don't have much idea. In this case, you could have like multiple clusters running on top of Rook configuration, or you only have one cluster.
We do support multiple NFS clusters running on a Rook configuration, yes.
And in this case, the namespaces are managed by Rook.
Are you referring to like RBD pool namespaces or
the clusters?
Yeah, I think he's talking about the Ganesha cluster radars namespace within the pool.
Yeah, I mean it's my memory that the cluster ID like is the name of the cluster that Rook creates, or like the name of the cluster Rook creates is what the manager module understands as cluster ID, and cluster ID directly translates to become the namespace in the .nfs pool where configuration for that cluster is stored.
I would agree with that. I was looking at the code this weekend, and I would agree.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And to get back to it, so we just need to sort of drop the orchestration backend requirement from specifically the export NFS export commands and handle the cluster ID verification. That's sort of the page we're on.
Yeah, so verifying the cluster ID is just a matter, and again, in the prototype code is just instead of today it loops through results from orchestration like list command. We could just change it to a Rados object list and grab the prototype code just creates a set of every returned object's namespace and uses that as the validation. So if you have a namespace foo and pass it cluster ID foo, everything works. If you don't have a namespace bar and you pass it -- cluster ID bar, it'll just tell you you don't have this cluster ID is not valid.
Right. I mean that makes sense to me.
All right. So we could simply drop the original proposal since Rook doesn't need it. They're already doing this setup, and in the future, if people want a command or a way to register new cluster IDs separately, we can do that as a separate effort because Rook doesn't need it.
Does that work for you, Blaine? Just dropping those sort of requirements from the export commands?
Yeah, I don't think those requirements really become necessary unless registering a cluster starts to become more complicated. Like if, registering a cluster requires creating a configuration object that has stuff in it. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I think it's pretty simple just to kind of change the path and that be it.
In that case, I should hopefully have a PR up before the end of the week. Matter of cleaning up my existing prototypes.
All right, that all sounds good to me. And also, John, I'll try to review your cleanup test stuff.
Yeah, thanks. It's all basically like, oh, that's not too Pythonic. Fix that, and there was like a spelling error.
Yeah.
All stuff.
I should give that a look. Maybe we can try to get that in quickly, so
Yeah.
we can just build on top of it instead of having to work around it.
That's okay. Back in the Hiketi days, I was doing a lot of that, so I'm used to it.
All right. I guess that covers that topic. I mentioned at the beginning, Vito, you had the topic you brought up in the IRC. Do you want to talk about that one here, the natural sorting stuff?
Oh yeah, I mean it's minor issue, but basically I don't know who raised the bug. I think it's some colleague.
So in the IRC, if you have that open.
Yeah, if
I can copy into the other pad.
If you go to the IRC, I think it's the last conversation.
It's in the other pad now as well.
This is the link.
I'll open it.
So this is the link I'm using. I'm not if it works for everybody. Maybe it has some session parts. This is the IRC. So basically, in the original bug, they are asking to use a natural sorting for the Ceph arch ps command, because natural right now it seems to be using like the normal Python sorted, but use alphanumeric order. So I'm wondering if we would go with the natural sorting. Maybe it doesn't make sense to only use it in one command. And for consistency, if we'll go that way, it will make more sense to use the same semantics for all the commands that return something similar.
What was the name of the Python thing we'd have to import?
It was not sort, I think. Which it is being proposed by the not sort. Is what they propose. This Python package that provides this functionality. So if we would like to implement it, we can just import this package, which is not imported right now. So we have to add it as a dependency. But I'm more concerned about like the consistency in the commands themselves. Okay, I don't see using, for example, this sorting for a one command and then have other commands returning a different sorting. And I'm not sure if right now we have unit testing or other levels testing checking the order return for this kind of commands. So if we change the order, we could break a lot of tests if we are checking for this kind of stuff.
Although I wouldn't say that's a big concern, because if it did break the test, we could just change the test. At least that's happened before. We've changed the output of things. We say add a field, remove a field. We have to go change a bunch of tests to get it to work.
Okay.
So I would never consider that like a blocker.
So then the question is more about consistency. If we think that changing this only for this command is okay, or if we should just go and provide it as an option. So the user can select what sorting he wants.
I'm not sure there's like a big reason people would want if they have like OSD like 10 versus like OSD 1 and have the order be different instead of just having them be numerically listed. I don't know. I don't see any benefit to having it be like alphabetical versus numerical in terms of those IDs like that. That's like the big sort of case we're worried about. I'm not sure if that's really worth any the options.
From the initial bug or issue, it seems that they were creating like a lot of OSDs, and for whatever reason, it was more easy for them to list and sort them in a natural way because they were using some counter or something like that.
Yeah, what I've seen from the bug is it goes like OSD 989, then OSD 99, then OSD 990.
Yeah.
Alphabetical. And I kind of agree with the bug that it's probably nicer to have them just go in order. He even mentions in that sort package there. Yeah, so for me, like whether or not we should do this for multiple commands, that's not really like a big question. I guess the only question is finding out which of those commands it is necessary for. So Orchcast, the obvious one. Orchls probably also wants to be on there. I don't know if you want to look into that, Fredo. Like,
Since this is the issue, that Sebastian has answered with something, I will post the issue so everybody can see it.
see what he's saying. He's saying OrchLS is probably not a big deal, but HostOS and DeviceOS, yeah.
But just a curiosity question: how many commands are there that you'd want consistency across your search and your output? I mean, wouldn't it be better if it were consistent across everything? You get the same order. I mean, it just seems a little.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what my opinion on it. I mean, that's what the question is right now. But I think my opinion would be that we should just keep it consistent across all the commands where it's sort of relevant.
Yeah.
There's not that many of them, I don't think either. Like I said,
what's the majority of ways they do it today? As long as it's consistent, I mean, you could probably make an argument for either. I mean,
right now it's just alphabetically lists everything. The issue we have with that is just that like the OSD ordering, or like if you have hosts that are ordered a certain way, like with like a numerical ID at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's alphabetical. Like he said, the example from the tracker was you have like OSD 989, and then OSD 99, and then OSD 990.
Okay.
So it would be nicer if it just went like like 98, 99, 100. That didn't sort it purely alphabetically like that.
Agreed. So we can make that decision, right, and be consistent across them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I would agree with that. We should just do it for all the relevant ones. There's only like 4 of them, I think. That has to happen for.
Okay, so we just implement the change for the relevance commands.
Yeah, I think it would be Orchcast.
The others using.
Is the concern if you have to do it all in one PR? Because I would argue you could file tracker issues for each command that's relevant and then just hit them all individually. You get to where you're going, but you don't have to do it all in one big jump.
Even then, I feel like it could just be like, if you really wanted to split it up, it could be separate commits in the same pull request. That's going to be it.
That's fine.
I mean, my concern was not like if we want to do it for all the commands in one PR. It was more about like the consistency as a matter of from the point of view of user.
And I don't see any reason not to just do it for all the relevant commands, personally.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody has any objections to that.
If everybody agree, so we can just do it for the relevant commands, and we can create like separate PRs and issues to track them. We're not like start implementing it if
you'd like, if you'd really want to like, if you'd like to organize it, you could make one tracker for just this in general, and then have the other ones as subtasks. Different commands.
Okay.
Okay. And whether or not you want to do it in one pull request with different commits or different pull requests, I mean, I'll leave that up to you.
Okay.
I thought the bigger question going into this was going to be whether we want to try to do some sort of implementation on our own, or if we want to.
Then the other question was if we want to add this not sort package dependency. I mean, in my case, if I had to implement it, I would say yes if we'll be using it in multiple places. So this way, we already have a dependency, and if in the future we have new commands with similar requirements, so we already have the support. It's more trusted than like trying to do it ourselves, the regular expressions or something similar.
I mean, I can see that. Yeah, if we're going to be using it in a bunch of spots, maybe we just use the package.
Yep.
Hopefully, it's one that's a bit easier. I know we've like had different difficulties with different ones. Like I remember with like Cherry Pie, it really wasn't that hard. I just had to put it in a couple different spots, make sure that they named it correctly. But I remember with async SSH, it was a whole thing where you had to like add it to some special copper repo and everything. So that's also a factor. If it's like something that you can just kind of put in some file somewhere and make a one-line change, and it's good. I'd say there's no reason to.
Okay. Okay, we'll double check that if it's easy and the package is available. Then we'll go with the package. Otherwise, we'll just try to implement it ourselves and put it in the utils module so everybody can make use of it.
Yeah, I mean that all works for me. If
Okay.
anyone has any issues with adding that dependency, I don't have any myself.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, good. And that was our last topic on the other pad. So I don't think I have anything else. There was a whole thing with the CentOS containers, but it seems like that should be fixed now. Don't really have to worry about that. Yeah. So, does anybody have anything else to bring up here? All right. In that case, I will see you guys all next week. Bye.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.